Okay, welcome back to Bread. Bible reading every day at Just Direction. This is day 93 of Bread. It is towards the end of the week now. We're already into Thursday. We're living in a different world right now. Things are very different for all of us. We got up early this morning to go to Sam's so that we could score some toilet paper. We did. We didn't get the paper towels we wanted, but we were able to get paper towels as well, and also a few things for my mom. But there was a line out there, but the thing is that this is the very first time that we've ever worn the masks. And so today we wore the masks, and we will be wearing them now whenever we go out to the stores. Pardon me, or in public like that. So we're living in something that is new, but nothing is new to the Lord. Nothing is new to God. And God knows what your steps are. He knows what you're going through. He knows your heart. He knows what you're feeling. So don't walk in fear, okay? When you walk in fear, you're not allowing God to have control. And I know that's easy to say because I'm preaching to myself, a lot of times. So trust me, I know what that is to walk in that fear. And I know what it is to, we're having little adjustments here. I know what it is to walk in fear. So whenever I say these things, it's because I've experienced it. Give us a second here while we have a bit of adjustments. Technical difficulties. There we go. There we go. All right, that should work now. Okay, so we're going to get started with bread. Today we are reading about David and Bathsheba. There we go. Maybe I can get these yawns out of my way. I do not know. I apologize for this. It aggravates me, but I can't help it. All right, so today we're going to be learning about David and Bathsheba. When I tell you that the Bible is full of every story that you can think of, it's full of mystery, it's full of intrigue, it's murder, it's plots for murder, which is what we're going to be reading about today. Lust. I mean, the Bible has everything. Tomorrow we're going to be reading about rape. Anything that happens in the world today. I mean, the plagues. Plagues are in the Bible. We're being plagued with coronavirus right now. Plagues are in the Bible. All we need to do is just turn to God. But anything that's going on today, we can find right here in the Word. So, open. Oh my goodness sakes, I'm so sorry. Open with me to 2 Samuel, and we're going to begin in chapter 11 today, 11 through 13. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, I find that so interesting when I read that. Every time I read that. There's a time of year that the kings normally go out to war. I mean, normally war is fought because you're having to fight for something, but not because, it's like the season. It's war season. So obviously there's a time of year, a season for war here. So I just find that rather fascinating. And of course, their wars were in different ways, than what we have wars for today. But anyway, in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Now, David, we read in the previous chapter, in chapter 10, where David had gone out to war and battled with them, and they defeated 20,000 troops in just a day. I believe it was just in a day. It really didn't give us a time, but anyway. Verse 2, late one afternoon after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. Now this had to be fairly close from his building to that building for him to see that she was beautiful. Okay, I mean, you can see that it's a nude woman, but he sees that she's beautiful. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. Now, David's already plotting this out in his mind. He's already been told that she is the wife of somebody, but instead, he's using his position of king, and he sends someone over to get her, and she comes over to him, and she sleeps with them. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period. Then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent a message to David saying, I'm pregnant. Then David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent to David. When Uriah arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how the war was progressing. You know, he's having chit-chat with him. You know, he's having war talk with him. You know, Uriah, here he is with the king. He's a commander. He's a leader in the army, and here he is with the king. You know, and talking with him. Let's see, and how the war was progressing. Then he told Uriah, go on home and relax. David even sent a gift to Uriah after he had left the palace. But Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. And why? Because his men were out fighting, and he didn't feel like he should do that. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, he summoned him and asked, what's the matter? Why didn't you go home last night after being away for so long? Uriah replied, the ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents, and Joab and my master's men are camping in the fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I would never do such a thing. Well, stay here today, David told him, and tomorrow you may return to the army. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner and got him drunk. But even then he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. Again, he slept at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest. Then pull back so that he will be killed. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. See what David's doing? He's plotting evil. I've lost my place, just a moment. Okay, there you are. And when the enemy's soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed, along with several other Israelite soldiers. And David set that up to have him killed. When Joab sent a battle report to David, he told his messenger, report all the news of the battle back to the king. But he might get angry and ask, why did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know there would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech, son of Gideon, killed at Thebez by a woman who threw a millstone down on him from the wall? Why would you get so close to the wall? Then tell him Uriah the Hittite was killed too. So the messenger went to Jerusalem and gave a complete report to David. The enemy came out against us in the open fields, he said, and as we chased them back to the city gate, the archers on the wall shot arrows at us. Some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged, David said. The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Fight harder next time and conquer the city. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. When the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. Then she gave birth to a son, but the Lord was displeased with what David had done. Chapter 12. So the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. Now notice that because David did this, now David and his family now have had a blessing taken from them, and now they're living under a curse that from now on they will live by the sword. From now on they will have to fight for everything. There's not going to be peace for him. This is what the Lord, I just read that. No. This is what the Lord says. Because of what you have done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you. We'll be reading about that more tomorrow. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will make this happen to you openly in the sight of all Israel. What a humiliation. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the Lord by doing this, your child will die. There's a consequence. After Nathan returned to his home, the Lord sent a deadly illness to the child of David and Uriah's wife. David begged God to spare the child. He went without food and lay all night on the bare ground. The elders of his household pleaded with him to get up and eat with them, but he refused. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to the point where you were begging God for something, and where you went without food, where you took that time of fasting, and you lay before God for hours and hours and hours. I have, and I'm going to tell you something. Those prayers work. Those prayers work. And when you call God to his promises, those prayers work in that time of fasting. Here, God has already told, the Lord has already told David what's going to happen. And it's not that his prayers aren't working because David needed to do this, because David needed to completely repent. But this child was not going to be saved. On the seventh day, the child died. David's advisors were afraid to tell him. He wouldn't listen to reason while the child was ill. They said, what drastic thing will he do when we tell him the child is dead? When David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. Then, much to their surprise, David got up from the ground, washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went to the tabernacle and worshiped the Lord. After that, he returned to the palace and was served food and ate. His advisors were amazed. We don't understand you, they told him. While the child was still living, you wept and refused to eat, but now the child is dead. You have stopped your mourning and are eating again. David replied, I fasted and wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. I will go to him one day. That child's in heaven. That child's in heaven. I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. Love that. Underline that in your scripture. Then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and slept with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and David named him Solomon. And Solomon, you're going to see, becomes one of the greatest kings. The Lord loved the child and sent word through Nathan the prophet, that they should name him Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord, as the Lord had commanded. Meanwhile, Joab was fighting against, let's read that again, okay? They named him Solomon, and the Lord loved the child, and sent word through Nathan the prophet that they should name him Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord, as the Lord had commanded. I don't think I've ever really grasped that before, because his name is Solomon. But the Lord tells them that they should name him Jedediah through the prophet. I love that, which means as beloved of the Lord. What a great name that is. Meanwhile, Joab was fighting against Rabbah, the capital of Ammon, and he captured the royal fortifications. Joab sent messengers to tell David, I have fought against Rabbah and captured its water supply. Now, bring the rest of the army and capture the city. Otherwise, I will capture it and get credit for it. Now, that's quite interesting, because Joab tells him, otherwise, I'll capture it, and I'm going to be the one to get credit for it. That's honor right there. David gathered the rest of the army and went to Rabbah, and he fought against it and captured it. David removed the crown from the king's head, and it was placed on his own head. The crown was made of gold and set with gems, and it weighed 75 pounds. That's heavy. David took a vast amount of plunder from the city. He also made slaves of the people of Rabbah and forced them to labor with saws, iron picks, and iron axes, and to work in the brick kilns. That is how he dealt with the people of all the Ammonite towns. Then David and all the army returned to Jerusalem. Chapter 13. Now David's son Absalom. Now we're going to start talking about the rape today. But tomorrow we're going to learn a lot more about Absalom. But he's going to be introduced today. Now David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar. And Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Amnon became so obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought he could never have her. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jonadab. He was the son of David's brother Shimea. One day, Jonadab said to Amnon, "What's the trouble? Why should the son of a king look so dejected morning after morning?" So Amnon told him, "I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Well," Jonadab said, "I'll tell you what to do. Go back to bed and pretend you are ill. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him you'll feel better if she prepares it as you watch and feeds you with her own hands." So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick, and when the king came to see him, Amnon asked him, "Please let my sister Tamar come and cook my favorite dish as I watch. Then I can eat it from her own hands." So David agreed and sent Tamar to Amnon's house to prepare some food for him. When Tamar arrived at Amnon's house, she went to the palace where he was lying down so he could watch her mix some dough. Then she baked his favorite dish for him. But when she set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. "Everyone get out of here," Amnon told his servants, so they all left. Then he said to Tamar, "Now bring the food into my bedroom and feed it to me here." So Tamar took his favorite dish to him. But as she was feeding him, he grabbed her and demanded, "Come to bed with me, my darling sister." Now that's completely gross to all of us. Completely gross. And yes, she is his sister, but it's a half-sister. Still doesn't make it okay. But, this was back in those days when in the family clans, that's where they married. They intermarried in the family clans. "No, my brother," she cried, "don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. Such wicked things aren't done in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please just speak to the king about it, and he will let you marry me." Now, this is so key right here. Because Amnon, he's not even thinking straight. Amnon is so full of lust right now and so full of selfish desire that he cannot think straight at all. And so what he does is a horrible thing. A horrible thing. She already tells him, "Just speak to my father and he'll let you marry me." But he doesn't do that. But Amnon wouldn't listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate. He hated her even more than he had loved her. "Get out of here," he snarled to her. Here he's defiled her, and now he hates her. He hates her because he's blaming her for his actions, which is what many people that are guilty do. They blame the other for their own actions instead of showing self-control. "No, no," Tamar cried. "Sending me away now is worse than what you've already done." But Amnon wouldn't listen to her. He shouted for his servant and demanded, "Throw this woman out and lock the door behind her." So the servant put her out and locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long, beautiful robe, as was the custom in those days for the king's virgin daughters. But now Tamar tore her robe and put ashes on her head, and then, with her face in her hands, she went away crying. Her brother Absalom asked her. Now she's following protocol. She's following, what is the word that I want? The ritual that they needed to do whenever they were no longer a virgin. Sure, she could have hidden that. She could have not put the ashes on her head. She could have not torn her robe. But she's following in the place of honor and what they are to do. What they are to do. And that has to be appreciated, because the things that we know that follow in our this is in the culture and in the Jewish religion, the children of Israel, and they're following with their cultural rituals. And that's probably not the best word that I want to use, but she's showing great respect for what they are to do. And yet the humiliation within her that she has to be feeling at this point, that she walks in there a virgin, and now she's raped, and she's torn her beautiful robe, and she's thrown ashes on her head. So anybody she passes by is going to see that. And then with her face in her hands, she went away crying. Her brother Absalom saw her and asked, "Is it true that Amnon has been with you?" "Well, my sister, keep quiet for now, since he's your brother. Don't worry about it." So Tamar lived as a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. And it also shows you how that bad word travels fast. Because Absalom said, "Is it true that Amnon, my brother, has been with you?" It's already, people are already knowing. The rumor mill has already been enacted. When King David heard what had happened, he was very angry. And though Absalom never spoke to Amnon about this, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons to come to a feast. He went to the king and said, "My sheep shearers are now at work. Would the king and his servants please come to celebrate the occasion with me?" Now remember, I told you, David plotted, and now we're seeing another plot to start to take effect. The king replied, "No, my son, if we all come, we would be too much of a burden for you." Absalom pressed him, but the king would not come, though he gave Absalom his blessing. "Well then," Absalom said, "if you can't come, how about sending my brother Amnon with us?" "Why Amnon?" the king asked, but Absalom kept on pressing the king until he finally agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. So Absalom prepared a feast fit for a king. Absalom told his men, "Wait until Amnon gets drunk, then at my signal, kill him. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who has given the command. Take courage and do it." So at Absalom's signal, they murdered Amnon. Then the other sons of the king jumped on their mules and fled. Now, I still believe that even had David been there, that Amnon still would have been murdered. It may have taken place in a different way, but he still would have been murdered and in front of his father. Or perhaps, things may have gone differently, but regardless, the plot was already there for him to be murdered. As they were on their way back to Jerusalem, this report, and it's also quite possible that David knew, that Absalom knew that David was not going to come, but if he kept pressing him, then he would agree to let his son Amnon come. So either way, this has been well plotted out. This is what he wanted to do, and for 2 years. And for 2 years, he's been trying to figure out a way to get revenge for his sister. As they were on their way back to Jerusalem, this report reached David. "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is left alive." And of course, we know that's not what happened. The king got up, tore his robe, and threw himself on the ground. His advisors also tore their clothes in horror and sorrow. But just then, Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemaiah, arrived and said, "No." Now remember, Jonadab is the cousin, and he's not a good cousin. He plotted this evil twist for Amnon to rape Tamar. He's not a good cousin. "No, don't believe that all the king's sons have been killed. It was only Amnon. Absalom has been plotting this ever since Amnon raped his sister Tamar. No, my lord, the king, your sons aren't all dead. It was only Amnon." Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Then the watchman on the Jerusalem wall saw a great crowd coming down the hill on the road from the west. He ran to tell the king, "I see a crowd of people coming from the Hornaim road along the side of the hill." "Look," Jonadab told the king, "there they are now. The king's sons are coming, just as I said." They soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and all his servants wept bitterly with them. And David mourned many days for his son Amnon. Absalom fled to his grandfather Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. He stayed there in Geshur for 3 years, and King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. See, that's the love of a father to his children. That's the love that you have. That even whenever your children do something horrible and horrendous, just as Amnon did, And now Absalom. You still love them. That doesn't take your love for them away. You may not like them, but you're going to always love them. You're not going to like their actions. But now then, David now longs to have that relationship with his son once again. So, okay, join me again tomorrow as we start with day 94 and we pick up again in chapter 14. And we're going to continue to read about Absalom, the things that happen in Absalom's life. Things don't go well for him. Things never go well when you plot evil. Things didn't go well for David when he did. And now look, and God told him, from now on, you will always live by the sword. And look, already a daughter was raped by a brother, and a brother was murdered by the brother. Things are not going well already because of David's actions where it started. We're seeing that domino effect where it started with Bathsheba and the plot that he made to kill Uriah. But it all started because he allowed his eyes to see that woman. Instead of turning away, he acted on his lust, which is also what Amnon did with Tamar. But he acted on his lust, and a child died from that. He lost a son. And now God said, from now on, you will live under a curse. You will not under a curse. You will live by the sword. And that's what's happened. We're already seeing the results of that continuing. So, all right, join me again tomorrow as we start with day 94 in chapter 14 of 2 Solomon. Bye-bye.